I went to a family dinner to put an end to years of humiliation. But instead of an apology, I was greeted by a scene I will never forget. I'm Ethan, 32 years old, male. I've spent most of my adult life trying not to become the version of myself my family always told me I was: boring, uptight, invisible. The reliable one, the safe son. You know the type: good grades, never causes trouble, never gets noticed. My parents, Michael and Jennifer, loved playing favorites. They'd never admit it, of course. They'd just say Jacob, my younger brother, 29, needed more attention, which is how they justified spending my entire childhood revolving around him. Jacob was the future of the family, the golden boy who could do no wrong, even when he was doing nothing right. When Jacob failed a math test, Mom blamed the teacher. When I got straight A's, Dad said, "Don't get cocky, Ethan." That was the rhythm of our house. Jacob's chaos was celebrated as passion. My stability was treated like background noise. They loved to tell people, Ethan's dependable, but Jacob's our dreamer. Except dreamer meant impulsive, entitled, and utterly incapable of taking responsibility. He got a new car at 17 after crashing his old one into a mailbox. I got a hand-me-down laptop for graduating top of my class. I remember sitting at dinner while Dad ranted about Jacob's potential, and Mom sighed that I could learn to loosen up a little. That night, I went for a walk in the rain until my clothes were soaked, because somehow being myself never felt good enough. When I left for college, they didn't even help me move in. "You're independent," Mom said proudly, like it was a compliment. What it really meant was, "You're easy to forget." Meanwhile, Jacob stayed home, partied through community college, and somehow convinced them he was finding himself. I think that's when I realized that in our family, love was transactional. You only got it if you were loud enough to demand it. I built a quiet life on purpose. I worked, saved, graduated, and eventually met Sophie, 28. Strong, kind, the first person who actually saw me. She made me feel real, but even then, my family treated her like an accessory to my life, not part of it. When I brought her home the first time, my mom looked her up and down like she was inspecting a thrift store find. And Jacob? God, Jacob was different with her. Too different.
Hey guys, real quick before we keep going, don't forget to sub and drop a like if you're enjoying the story. Thank you very much. Enjoy watching.
It started with compliments that lasted too long. Accidental brushes when walking past her. These little moments that made my stomach twist. Sophie would laugh it off, uncomfortable but polite. I'd tell her Jacob was harmless. I wanted to believe that. But deep down, I knew my brother's charm always hid something rotten underneath. Looking back, I think I started losing my family long before I stopped talking to them. I just hadn't realized yet that maybe losing them was the only way to save myself. Sophie met my family twice before she started dreading it. The first time was Christmas, 3 years ago. My parents had decided to keep it intimate, which in their language meant no one who might call them out for their behavior. We drove 6 hours to their place, a 2-story house in the kind of suburban neighborhood that smells like chlorine and control. I remember gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. Sophie squeezed my hand at red lights, the way she does when she knows I'm bracing for something. "Just breathe," she whispered. When we got there, Mom greeted Sophie like she was interviewing her, complimented her dress, then immediately asked if she'd ever considered something more mature. Dad clapped me on the shoulder, said, "Didn't think you had it in you, son," like Sophie was some kind of trophy. I wanted to sink through the floor, then Jacob walked in. He'd gained weight, lost whatever job he'd been bragging about the year before, and still somehow carried himself like he owned the place. He hugged Sophie a little too long, said her perfume smelled dangerous. I laughed it off in the moment, mostly to avoid the explosion I could already feel building inside me. Sophie gave me this small, uneasy smile. We didn't talk about it until later, in the guest room, when she said quietly, "Your brother gives me a weird feeling." And I said, "Yeah. He gives everyone a weird feeling." But I didn't do anything, not really. I'd been conditioned my whole life to minimize whatever Jacob did, to smooth over his messes. That's what I was there for, apparently. The responsible one, the family shock absorber. The second visit was my mistake. Mom guilt-tripped us into coming down for Jacob's birthday. She sent this long, emotional text about keeping family bonds alive, and how nice it would be to see you both again. I remember reading it out loud to Sophie in the kitchen while she chopped vegetables for dinner. She just sighed and said, "If you want to go, I'll go with you." At the party, Jacob was already drunk by 5 p.m. He kept calling Sophie Sunshine, which she hated, and every time she moved, he seemed to be right there, grabbing her wrist to get her attention, leaning too close when he talked. When I stepped in once, told him to back off, he laughed. "Relax, bro. She's friendly, aren't you, Soph?" The room went quiet. My parents just looked at each other, then at me, like I was the one causing a scene. Mom even said, "Ethan, don't make this awkward." I wanted to scream. Sophie pulled my hand under the table, trying to calm me down, but I could feel her shaking. We left early. In the car, she cried, quietly, like she didn't want to make it real. I told her I was sorry, that I'd talk to them, that I'd fix it. But how do you fix something that was designed to break you? After that night, I stopped answering my parents' calls. Texts piled up, some guilt-tripping, some passive-aggressive, some pretending nothing had happened. Jacob sent Sophie a DM 2 weeks later. "Didn't mean to freak you out, beautiful. You're just hard to forget. She showed me the message. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the phone. That was the first time I blocked my own brother. The first time I told Sophie, "You're right, my family's not just messed up, they're dangerous." After I blocked Jacob, things went quiet for a while. Too quiet. No calls, no texts from my parents either, just silence, which almost felt like peace. Sophie and I focused on our lives. Work, late night dinners, movie marathons on the couch. For the first time, it felt like I had a life that wasn't built around fixing someone else's chaos. But peace never lasts long when your family runs on manipulation. It started small again, like it always did. A call from my mom, pretending nothing had happened. "We miss you," she said. "Jacob's been trying so hard to get better. You should be proud of him." The way she said it, like I'd somehow abandoned a child instead of protecting my fiancé from a grown man who couldn't control himself, made me sick. I told her we weren't ready to see them, that we needed space. Her voice got soft, syrupy. "Ethan, family doesn't stay mad forever. Don't let Sophie drive a wedge between you and your brother." That line stuck with me. Don't let Sophie drive a wedge. She made it sound like Sophie was the problem. Like I was the weak one being manipulated, not the son they'd ignored for decades. A week later, Sophie came home from work, pale and shaking. There was a bouquet of roses on our doorstep. No note, just a single white envelope with her name written in handwriting I recognized instantly. Jacob's. Inside was a photo, one from Christmas, taken without her noticing. She was sitting on the couch, laughing at something my dad had said. On the back, he'd written, "You looked happiest that day. I missed that smile." I called my mom immediately, furious. She acted confused. "Oh, Ethan, you always overreact. Jacob was just being thoughtful. It's not like he hurt anyone." I hung up before I said something I couldn't take back. Sophie sat next to me, silent, clutching that photo like it was toxic. "He's not going to stop, is he?" she whispered. And I didn't know what to say. Because deep down, I knew she was right. 2 days later, Sophie's car got keyed in the parking lot at her job. The word "liar" scratched across the driver's side door. The cop said they couldn't do much without witnesses or camera footage. I didn't have proof, but I didn't need it. I could feel his fingerprints on everything. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every noise outside made me jump. I kept checking the locks, walking from room to room, like some paranoid watchdog. Sophie finally came up behind me, wrapped her arms around my waist, and said, "You can't keep fixing this, Ethan. You didn't break it." But that's what they trained me to do. Take the hit, clean the mess, pretend everything was fine. I filed a police report the next day anyway. Not that it helped. Jacob called that evening from a blocked number, left a voicemail I'll never forget. His voice was calm, almost cheerful. "You think you can replace family, but blood always wins, brother." That's when I knew this wasn't just about jealousy anymore. It was about control. Jacob had decided Sophie wasn't just my fiancée. She was something he deserved. And my parents, they were still pretending not to see it. By autumn, I'd almost convinced myself the worst was behind us. Sophie and I had gotten engaged in September, quietly just us, no family involved. I proposed during a weekend trip to the coast, on this cliff, overlooking the water. It was peaceful, perfect. She cried, said yes, and for a moment the world felt small enough to be safe. Then my mother found out. I don't know how, probably through one of her accidental social media deep dives, but one Sunday afternoon, my phone started blowing up. First a text, heard the news, "We should talk." Then another, "Don't shut us out, Ethan. Family deserves to celebrate too." Deserve, that word again. I ignored her for a few days, but the messages kept coming, switching between guilt trips and fake sweetness. It breaks my heart that you think we don't care. Then, 2 days later, "You owe it to your father to be civil." Finally, a letter arrived in the mail, handwritten. The envelope smelled like her perfume, the same one that used to fill every room when I was a kid. Inside was a folded card with gold leaves printed along the edge. "Dear Ethan," it started. "Thanksgiving won't be the same without you and Sophie. Your father and I have reflected on everything that's happened. We miss our family. We'd love a chance to make things right. Please come home." At the bottom, she'd written in a smaller slanted script, "Jacob has grown up a lot. He'd love to see you both." When Sophie read that line, she went quiet. "I'm not going," she said immediately. I didn't blame her. God, I didn't want to either. But there was something about that letter, something that felt like unfinished business. A part of me needed to face them, to end whatever hold they still had on me before I started my own family. "I just want closure," I told her. She hesitated and nodded slowly. "Then I'll be there with you. But if he tries anything again, Ethan, anything, I'm not staying quiet this time." We drove down the day before Thanksgiving. The sky was gray, heavy, like it knew what was coming. Sophie was silent most of the ride, her hands in her lap. I tried to make small talk, but every mile closer to my parents' house made me feel like I was driving into a trap. When we pulled up, everything looked the same. The same porch light flickering, the same wind chimes my mother had hung when I was 10. She opened the door before I could knock, smiling too wide. "Oh my God, Sophie, you look stunning," she said, pulling her in for a hug Sophie clearly didn't want. Then she turned to me. "Ethan? You look tired. Work keeping you busy?" My father was in the kitchen, pretending to carve a turkey that wasn't even cooked yet. And Jacob, he was standing by the fireplace, beer in hand, that same smug grin like none of this ever happened. "Hey, brother," he said. "Long time." Sophie stiffened. I stepped between them, forcing a smile. "We're just here for dinner, Jacob. Nothing more." He laughed softly. "Sure, just dinner." Mom clapped her hands together. "Good. Let's make this a happy Thanksgiving. No drama." But drama was the only language our family ever spoke. The meal started off fake. Laughs, polite small talk. All of us pretending this was normal. Then Jacob began drinking harder, leaning closer to Sophie every time he spoke. My mom shot me warning looks whenever I tensed up, silently ordering me to stay civil. By dessert, Sophie was barely holding it together. Jacob had slipped into full-blown flirting again, his tone darker now. "You've always been too good for my brother, Soph. I said that the first time I met you." Sophie's hand tightened around her fork. My dad chuckled awkwardly, like it was all just brotherly teasing. Then Jacob touched her shoulder. She froze. "Don't," I said quietly. He smirked. "Relax, Ethan. It's a compliment." Sophie stood up. "I'm done," she said, voice shaking. "I need air." She walked down the hall toward the guest room. Jacob followed. I was out of my chair before anyone could blink. My mother yelled something about not making a scene, but I didn't care. When I reached the hallway, Sophie's voice came from behind the closed door, terrified, crying, "Leave me alone." That's when I knew something had finally snapped. The sound of Sophie's voice behind that locked door will haunt me for the rest of my life. She wasn't yelling like someone angry. She was yelling like someone afraid. I hit the hallway in 3 strides. My mother's voice followed me, shrill, panicked. "Ethan, stop it! You're overreacting." But I barely heard her. The door to the guest room was closed, and Jacob was pounding on it with his palm, laughing. "Come on, Soph, don't be dramatic. I just want to talk." "Open the door, Jacob," I said, my voice low. He turned, eyes glassy, grin crooked. "Oh, Big Brother's finally got a spine." I stepped closer. "Move away from that door." He took a lazy sip from his beer and said, "She's not yours to protect. You don't deserve her." Something inside me cracked. Years of swallowing anger, letting him get away with everything, pretending it didn't hurt. It all hit at once. I grabbed him by the collar and shoved him back into the wall so hard the picture frames rattled. The beer bottle shattered on the floor. My dad came running in shouting, "Ethan, let him go." But Jacob was already swinging. His fist caught my cheek, a sloppy, but enough to send a flash of pain through my head. "You always think you're better than me," he yelled, but she wanted me, not you. I didn't even recognize my own voice when I shouted back, "You're a liar and a coward. She's terrified of you." He lunged again, but this time I dodged. He slipped on the spilled beer and hit the corner of the table, cutting his forehead open. Blood everywhere. My mom screamed like I was the monster. "Look what you've done. You've hurt your brother." Meanwhile, Sophie cracked the door open, trembling, clutching her phone. "I called the police," she whispered. "They're coming." My dad froze. My mom gasped like she'd been slapped. Jacob stumbled to his feet, blood dripping down his face, still sneering. "You called the cops on family?" He spat. I stood between him and Sophie. "You laid a hand on her, Jacob. You don't get to say that word anymore." The next 10 minutes were chaos. Shouting, door slamming, my mother trying to convince Sophie to just calm down and not ruin Jacob's life. When the police arrived, she switched tactics instantly. Tears, drama, the full victim routine. It was just a misunderstanding. My sons were just roughhousing. But Sophie wasn't having it. She stepped forward, voice steady, even though her hands were shaking, and told the officers everything. The stalking, the messages, the harassment, the photo in the envelope. Jacob tried to laugh it off, but the officers separated us quickly. They took photos, asked questions, wrote down everything. When they led him out to the squad car, my mom lunged for him, crying, "This is your brother. You can't let them take him." He looked at me over his shoulder and said, "You'll regret this." I didn't answer. I just stood there holding Sophie as she sobbed into my chest, while the flashing red and blue lights reflected off the windows of my parents' perfect little house. The silence that followed was almost worse than the noise. My father just stood by the table, pale, muttering something about the neighbors seeing. My mom was still crying, begging the officers to let Jacob go. When they finally left, I took Sophie's hand. "We're done here," I said. My mother tried to block the door. "Ethan, please." "No," I said. "You chose him. Always him. And now you can live with that." We drove home in silence. My face was bruised, Sophie's hands still trembling. When we finally got back, she sat on the couch and whispered, "I thought he was going to hurt me." I didn't know how to answer that. Because deep down, I knew he would have, if I hadn't been there. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty for walking away from them. Update. Hey, everyone. I didn't expect the first post to blow up like it did. I've spent the last 2 days reading through the comments with Sophie next to me on the couch. Some of you were furious on our behalf. Some shared your own stories about families that protected the wrong kid, and a few of you told me straight up, "Don't you dare go back there." I needed to hear that. So, here's what's happened since that night. Jacob was arrested for disorderly conduct, assault, and trespassing. The police kept him overnight. They told us because of the prior messages. And Sophie's statement, the case would likely escalate once they gathered more evidence. Sophie filed for a restraining order the next morning. The officer who took her report was kind. He looked tired, like he'd seen this too many times before, and said, "Don't second-guess protecting yourself. Guys like him always test the limits." Mom called the next day pretending nothing had happened. "Ethan, I just want to clear the air. You know your brother was drunk. He didn't mean anything by it. She actually said he didn't mean anything by it, as if nearly attacking my fiancé in their own house was a clumsy joke. When I told her Sophie had filed charges, she went silent for a beat and then hissed, "You're destroying this family." I hung up. That afternoon, Dad texted me a single line. "Handle this quietly. Your mother can't take the stress." I didn't respond, but Sophie did, from her phone. "Tell Michael to worry about his criminal son, not my safety." And that was the first time I saw her anger burn hotter than her fear. It made me realize how much she'd been holding in. We spent the next week meeting with the detective assigned to the case. They pulled Jacob's phone records. Because of the messages and voicemails, the harassment charge became official. Then, the detective said something that chilled me. We found other communications, women he's contacted using fake accounts, same tone, same photos. It wasn't just Sophie. Jacob had been doing this for years. When that came out, my parents went full PR mode. My mother sent an email to clarify misunderstandings, claiming Sophie had flirted with Jacob and that I'd overreacted under stress. She even CC'd a family friend who works in real estate, someone who has nothing to do with any of this, like she was building an audience for her lie. I forwarded the email straight to the detective. That's when things spiraled. Turns out Jacob had been using their address for fake business registrations, stuff tied to identity theft, small-scale fraud. Credit cards, fake invoices, the works. When investigators showed up with a warrant, my parents tried to stonewall them, which of course made it worse. Now there's an open case not just for harassment, but for financial fraud. My father's handle this quietly attitude suddenly didn't work anymore. Meanwhile, Sophie and I are trying to live like normal people again. We've been seeing a therapist, mostly to process the whiplash of going from family dinners to police reports. She still jumps whenever the phone rings. I still check the locks twice before bed. But there's something different between us now. Closer, heavier, honest. Some of you said the only real revenge is peace. Maybe that's true. But part of me wants more than peace. I want truth. I want every person who's called me the overreacting son to see exactly who they've been protecting. The investigation's just starting, and if I've learned anything from my brother, it's that once someone like Jacob starts to crumble, they drag everyone down with them. Next time I post, I'll tell you what came out in court, because the real story, the one my parents have spent years burying, is finally clawing its way into the light. The trial started 6 months later. By then, the shock had worn off and turned into something sharper. Focus. Sophie and I had both taken time off work. Therapy had helped, but I could still feel the old anxiety creeping in every time I saw an unfamiliar number flash on my phone. Jacob's court date felt like the final round of a nightmare we'd both been stuck in for years. He walked into the courthouse looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. No smirk this time, no swagger, just pale skin, greasy hair, and a cheap suit that didn't fit right. My parents were behind him, pretending to be the picture of concerned family. My mother even brought tissues, like she was starring in her own tragedy. The prosecutor started with the harassment evidence, the messages, the photos, the roses, the keyed car. Watching Sophie on the stand broke me a little. She spoke clearly, but her voice trembled at the edges. When they played Jacob's voicemail, "You think you can replace family, but blood always wins, brother." The entire room went still. My mom stared straight ahead. My dad rubbed his temples like he had a headache. Jacob just looked down, chewing on the inside of his cheek. Then came the fraud charges. That part blindsided everyone except me and Sophie. Because a few weeks before the trial, the detective had called and said, "You might want to sit down." Apparently, Jacob had been using our parents' accounts to launder money from fake business ventures, consulting services that didn't exist, loans that were never repaid. Over $200,000 had moved through their names in the past 2 years. And the kicker: some of it was tied to stolen identities from people Jacob had met through those fake online profiles, women. So when the investigator took the stand and explained how Michael and Jennifer knowingly benefited from fraudulent activity, I didn't feel shock anymore, just relief. The truth was finally doing the heavy lifting for me. My mother broke first. She cried. Real tears this time, the messy kind. She kept saying she didn't know that Jacob handled the finances, but the paper trail said otherwise. They'd been moving money through joint accounts, signing checks, covering his credit card bills. Dad tried to take the fall for both of them, saying he'd made mistakes as a father, but the judge wasn't moved. He just said, "Mistakes are when you forget a birthday. This is organized crime." Jacob was convicted of attempted sexual assault, harassment, and multiple counts of fraud. My parents got probation and heavy fines for financial complicity. It wasn't prison for them, but it was exposure. And for people like Michael and Jennifer, reputation was everything. Watching my mother's face when the local news aired her mugshot felt like poetic justice. After court, Sophie and I didn't say much. We just walked out into the sunlight, the courthouse doors closing behind us. She slipped her hand into mine and said, "We did it. It's over." But it didn't feel over yet. A week later, I sent an email to every family friend who'd ever defended my parents. The ones who'd said I was ungrateful, who'd called Sophie dramatic. Attached were the court documents, the official verdicts, and a single line I wrote at the bottom. "Thank you for teaching me what family isn't." No explanation, no anger, Just the truth in writing, like the final chapter of something that should have ended years ago. Mom tried to call after that, multiple times, but I never answered. The last voicemail she left said, "Ethan, we all make mistakes. You can't erase family." She was wrong. I didn't erase them. They erased themselves. Sophie and I got married quietly 2 months later in a small ceremony near the coast. Just close friends, no speeches, no drama. When the officiant said, "You may kiss the bride," I finally felt like I was standing in a life that belonged entirely to me. But the real revenge wasn't the courtroom or the email. It was the peace that came after. Waking up without fear, without guilt, knowing that I'd finally broken the cycle. It's been 3 years since the verdict. Sometimes I still wake up expecting a call from my mother, a text from some unknown number, or a letter written in that same looping handwriting that used to reel me back in. But the phone stays quiet now. The silence used to feel heavy, like waiting for another explosion. These days, it feels like air. Sophie and I moved to Portland a few months after the trial. We needed distance, real distance, the kind that can't be undone by a guilty voicemail. I sold what was left of my parents' house after the bank repossessed it and used part of that money to buy a small place near the edge of town. It's not fancy, but it's ours. There's a maple tree out front that turns fire red in the fall, and Sophie says it feels like the house is breathing when the leaves start to move. Last year, we had our son, Caleb. He has Sophie's eyes and my crooked smile, and when he laughs, it's this wild open sound that makes every dark memory lose its shape a little. I never thought I'd be a dad. For a long time, I was terrified I'd turn into Michael, cold, transactional, incapable of real affection. But the first time I held Caleb, I realized love isn't some performance you earn. It's steady, quiet, built moment by moment. When he was born, my mom tried to reach out again. A short message this time. "We heard you had a baby. We'd like to meet our grandson." I stared at that text for a long time before replying. "You've already met your legacy. His name was Jacob." And then I blocked the number for good. That might sound harsh, but I don't think forgiveness always looks like opening the door again. Sometimes it looks like locking it and walking away. Sophie asked me once if I ever miss them. Not the chaos, but the idea of family. I told her the truth. Sometimes, yes. There are nights when I think about the version of them that could have existed. The parents who might have been proud instead of cruel. The brother who might have loved instead of taken. But those people never existed. I grieved them and then I let them go. Now my family fits into a smaller frame. Sophie, Caleb, and the life we built from the ashes. It's quiet here. The kind of quiet that means safety, not silence. On weekends, we take Caleb to the park, and when he falls, I'm the one who picks him up. Not because I'm supposed to, but because I want to. Sometimes, when the sun sets over the water, Sophie leans into me and says, "Can you believe we survived all that?" And I just hold her a little tighter, watching Caleb chase the light through the trees and say, "We didn't just survive, we started over." Because in the end, the greatest revenge wasn't the trial, or the exposure, or even the justice. It was this, peace. A home that doesn't need proving. A family that chose each other. The kind of love that finally makes the word family mean something worth keeping.